Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. It's Friday, October 18th, 2024. Happy birthday to my mom. She turns 80 today, so I'm trying to go down and see her real quick in between all my meetings. Just thank you all for being here. Happy Friday, and just really excited to have you all here. It is I'm Chair Jody Shai McNally, Larimer County Commissioner, and this is the Legislative Committee for the Colorado Forest Health Council. And I call this meeting to order. And Roberta, I hope you don't mind taking roll call real quick. Let me see if we have quorum. I think we do. So, thank you.
Sure. I will go down the list. Samantha Albert.
Present. Hi, all.
Katie McGrath Novak.
Present.
Pat Dorsey.
Good morning.
Christina Burry.
Morning.
Commissioner Jody Shattuck McNally.
Good morning, everyone.
Julie Stencil. Selwyn Whiteskunk. Commissioner Medina.
Present.
Allison Lurch.
Good morning, everyone.
And that's who I have on my list. I got an email that Mark Morgan was going to not be able to make this meeting.
It might be good if I unmute. Okay, thank you very much. So I think we have quorum, correct? Okay, so we'll move on to our agenda items. Sorry, my computer keeps throwing screens up at me. So we have some minutes to approve from October 4th. Has everyone had a chance to look through those? Any questions, concerns, additions, edits? If not, I'd welcome a motion to approve those minutes, please.
I'll move to approve.
Thank you. We have a second?
A second.
Thank you. I think Pat Dorsey and Veronica about the same time. So let's just have them both. All right. So any further discussion? If not, all those in favor? Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Is there anyone opposed? Okay, minutes are passed. Thank you so much. So we'll move on to the next agenda item, and just want to honor our next presenter's time. And thank you so much, Jeremy, for coming back, as we were being very ambitious trying to have that everyone onto one agenda with the same topic, and we appreciate you coming back today. Sometimes, we get into big discussions, and they were great presentations. So we want to make sure we gave you enough time, because we're very interested in and want to hear from you. This is a very unique perspective, and we're really grateful for you to be here today. So with that, Jeremy Taylor, can you just tell, you're from Colorado Springs Utilities. Can you tell me your title and introduce yourself? And you have the floor. I don't know if you have things you want to share on the screen, but please proceed. And thank you for being here.
You bet. Thank you, Commissioner. Can everybody hear me okay? Perfect.
Yep.
Well, I appreciate everybody inviting me to come and present to you folks. My name is Jeremy Taylor. I do work for Colorado Springs Utilities. I'm their Forest Program Manager. I've been a Forest Program Manager for them for about 5 years now, administering wildfire risk mitigation measures, forest health measures for municipal watershed lands and some adjacent watershed lands. And so I appreciate everybody taking the time to allow me to present. Can you guys see my screen? It says that I am not available to share, but I don't know if I am sharing. I have a stop share, but it says I'm not able to share. So figure that one.
And Allison or Roberta help with that?
How about now? Nope. Sorry, an error has occurred.
Let's give us 1 second. Let's see if we can give you some permissions, Jeremy.
Sure.
And sorry about that.
Not a problem.
I'm seeing that contributors should be able to share their screen. It's turned on for me.
Okay, let me try again.
If not, maybe Jeremy, you can share, send your slides to Roberta or to Allison quick, and maybe they can do that. Again,
Absolutely.
apologize for that.
Nope, not a problem. Shoot.
You can send it to either of those email addresses I put in the chat.
While you're doing that, I realized we only approved, I said October 4th and not May 31st as well. So I will welcome a motion if we could go back a step and approve them. We didn't approve the minutes from May 31st. So I would welcome a motion real quick to approve those minutes, please.
I'll move.
Pat, do you want a second? Great. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Is there any other any in opposition? Okay, those minutes are approved. Thank you all. Okay, here we go. Thank you everyone for helping.
Jeremy, we can see your screen now.
Oh, perfect. All right. Fifth time's a charm.
Thank you, Jeremy.
You bet. Thank you. Perfect. Let me get this stood up and just took a moment. Perfect. Can everybody see it all right now? Awesome. Okay, let's fly through this. So, Jeremy Taylor, Forest Program Manager. Like I say, what we look at is to, for this presentation, we're going to be looking at what Colorado Springs Utilities is, how we operate, the forest management and partnership, the forest restoration and wildfire mitigation. And then we're also going to talk a little bit about our successes and sustainability as it relates to forest management. So who is Colorado Springs Utilities? Colorado Springs Utilities is a 4-service, soon to be a 5-service utility provider on the Front Range, right at the base of Pikes Peak in El Paso County. We serve about 600,000 residents here in Colorado Springs and on some of the adjacent lands. We provide electric, natural gas, water, wastewater, soon to be fiber for all of our customers. And so that is going to be part of our portfolio rolling into 2025. Most importantly is the water. That's where it really ties into the forest health and forest as it relates to sustainable water, clean and reliable water resources. We do have primarily our terminal storage, so our reservoirs, our terminal storage right on Pikes Peak. And on Pikes Peak itself, we have about 14,000 acres of land ownership that is just right here at the foothills. But a lot of our terminal storage is actually on U.S. Forest Service lands under agreements and partnerships, and we'll talk a little bit about that here in a second. But the forest management program is really the key to sustainability and making sure that we are protecting those terminal storage facets and collecting the good, clean, sustainable water. So as we look at that, let's talk a little bit about the water system. So our water system is extremely diverse. We actually span 11 counties worth of pipelines and infrastructures to actually get water to the Front Range. So Colorado Springs is one of the few large municipal cities that is not located on a major water system. We're not on a lake. We're not on a major river. We have a creek that runs through our community, but it's not really sustainable. So a lot of our water actually has to come from other parts of the state. About 46% of our water system comes from what we consider more or less the western slope or the upper Arkansas headwaters. And it travels over 120 miles all the way to Colorado Springs. And a lot of these designs and resources that were collected are over 100 years old for us to have the abilities to transfer that water through Trans Mountain diversions and through pipeline. But the Forest Management Partnership really expands across some multiple elements. Like I say, we're spanning infrastructure across 11 counties. We have some land ownership across those 11 counties. So the partnership is really, really the key. But one of the challenges we run into is how do we decide across 11 counties, where do you go to work? How do you implement work and what's a higher priority over another? So in 2008, we completed a forest management and wildfire risk assessment utilizing a contractor. And what we did was we looked at watershed scale, started at the Huck 12 watershed, went to a Huck 7 watershed, and trying to assess where our biggest risks are. Excuse me. And we look at forest health, we look at soil erodibility, we look at insect and disease, we look at historical wildfires impacts, we look at the steepness of the slope, so where we can actually anticipate issues as it arises. And we look at all these different variables. There's about 7 different variables that run into this risk modeling to help us prioritize which watershed is more important for our system and for our infrastructure. So this basically helps us eat that elephant of priority and understanding where we can implement projects. The protection of the municipal water supply and terminal storage, that's the biggest key for us. You know, a reservoir is nothing more than a bucket of water, but it's very susceptible to post-fire impacts. And so as we look at those impacts, we need to understand how we can mitigate some of those risks, both from catastrophic wildfire, but also that post-fire debris flow and where that sediment can impact the water quality, also the terminal storage of that infrastructure. We also look at our diversions. So our diversions in our waterways, especially on U.S. Forest Service lands, where we actually have the intake or the pipe, where it is the receptacle of some of these creeks and streams, and that water goes into a pipeline to then be transferred into these reservoirs. It's really key that we protect those aspects at the headwaters and making sure that we are protecting it from sediment, debris, contamination, etc. So we'll talk about that more here in a second, but that really helps us understand a holistic approach. We're not just looking at the buckets of water, but really everything in between, and how do we protect it from its source. So as we look at that through a cross-boundary partnership, I'm a one-person shop. Unfortunately, a forest management program is just me, myself, and I have to really rely on our partners, and that's where the rubber hits the road for us for the program. I rely solely on my partners, and without having good, effective partners, I couldn't do this work at the scale that I have. The partnership is really a collaborative effort from forest management across all of the priority watersheds. So across those 11 counties, it means partnerships with the U.S. Forest Service, State Forest Service, Department of Natural Resources, and then even nonprofit organizations to really help us maximize their abilities and capacity in implementing forest management and forest health projects across the landscape. As I mentioned, we do have a large amount of infrastructure that's on U.S. Forest Service lands. So some of our cross-boundary ownership and shared responsibility is actually on some of those Forest Service lands through the 1914-1924 agreements. So these agreements stated over 100 years ago that we would help manage the forests, and we would help ensure the forest health is viable if we are going to collect water off of these landscapes. And so that is a condition that we hold very near and dear to our hearts, because that's how we help protect the loss of water and making sure that that clean, sustainable water is there. But also part of this is helping with wildfire. So that's one of the unique facets of Colorado Springs Utilities, is actually from that 1924 agreement. We also have a wildland fire team where we have about 60 individuals that will respond to wildland fire across the landscapes and help suppress wildfires from occurring. And so it's a unique facet of what we do, but it's not just the forest health, but it's also making sure that we don't have devastating impacts from catastrophic wildfire. So as we look at these different agreements and we look at the management and maintenance of these lands, I really have to rely on, like you say, the partnerships, but also the funding mechanisms that these individuals come to bear with us. Our money is not limitless. We have to understand where our biggest priorities are, where our biggest aspects are for project implementation. But then we also look to our partners to help us maximize our dollars. And some of that comes through matching contributions. Some of it comes through grant funding opportunities. And so our partners are really, really key in helping us maximize the best bang for the buck, or making $1 into $2 very quickly. And so that makes our funding go a lot further. And we'll talk a little bit more about this. But ultimately, the wildfire risk in modeling is where our foundation is. So we have to decide who our partners are, depending on where the risk is. So if we have a watershed that is a high important risk, but it has diverse lands, it may be private lands, it may be state lands, it may be federal lands, we have to identify all those different partners and find the right funding mechanism to allow cross-boundary partnership and collaboration to implement project work on those landscapes. Sometimes it's easier said than done, but other times we really have to look to our partners to say, would you be willing to go out and research some of this work, go out and implement the projects, or be willing to knock on a few doors to see if we can get this fuels work and the fire mitigation work implemented. And so that's been really, really effective for our program for the last 15 years. Within the last 5 years, we've actually pursued the forest restoration wildfire mitigation opportunities to treat landscapes. And as I mentioned, our dollars don't go as far as they used to. So our annual budget is about $2 million to implement forest health and wildfire risk reduction project work across the landscapes. So that includes, like I mentioned, the U.S. Forest Service lands, private lands, state lands, and even our own deeded lands to implement project work. So the biggest success to us has been the Good Neighbor Authority. As I mentioned, we have to rely on our partners to look across those landscapes and say we have a wildfire risk and a need for forest restoration in these landscapes at a watershed scale. A lot of that watershed scale is U.S. Forest Service lands. And so we quickly recognized that. And shortly after I was onboarded, we were successful in securing a Good Neighbor Authority, or GNA, for the Pikes Peak region. That identified 1,000 acres in 5 projects. So good 1,000 acres was identified for the targeted goal for treatment. And the 5 project areas were primarily on Pikes Peak. And I'll show you a map here in a second of where we were able to implement that project work. From there, we were able to recognize we don't have all the money in the world to try to accomplish all of these projects. So we really looked to grant funding dollars, and we were successful in securing $2 million of DNR funding through the COSWAP funding opportunity in both El Paso and Teller County. We received $1 million in the Healthy Forest and Vibrant Communities through Colorado State Forest Service. We received $1.4 million in the Wildfire Ready watersheds, which we're actually in the process of closing out. And we actually started the implementation dollars and securing those funds. And then lastly, the bipartisan infrastructure law grant program through the U.S. Forest Service. U.S. Forest Service came to the table with a number of those dollars to be implemented for GNA because it is within the priority watersheds and wildfire crisis strategy areas of opportunity on Pikes Peak. So as I mentioned, the 5 projects under that GNA. So this has been a very big success for us in Colorado State Forest Service. I really could not do it without our partners in the Woodland Park District. Luckily, those guys over in that shop are just rolling with the punches and accommodating my craziness and looking at opportunities. And when I said, hey, I want to pursue this grant funding opportunity, identify all these projects, these folks just rolled up their sleeves and went to work. And so this is what really we can't take credit for it, but our opportunities that our state Forest Service partners were able to bear through this and implement projects has just been phenomenal. So in a timeline of 5 years, we're able to complete most of this work. So you can see the 3 projects, North Cat 1, North Cat 2, which are the 2 green in the far left. Those are actually underway as we speak. They are currently completing those projects. The toll road, which is that teal one right in the middle of the project, is actually went out to bid last week. And then the red project has been completed, that one right along Pikes Peak Highway. And then that yellow one is still yet to go. But what we're looking at, when you look at it, it's the projects in relation to our wildfire ready watersheds and in relation to our reservoirs. You can see these are really key landscapes when we start looking at this cross-boundary scale. The shaded areas and that shaded blue is actually what Colorado Springs Utilities owns. But without the help of the Good Neighbor Authority and our partners at Colorado State Forest Service, we wouldn't be able to implement these projects, and it would have been a low priority for the U.S. Forest Service to target specifically these areas of opportunity. So this is really instrumental in our headwaters of our reservoirs, protecting those landscapes and protecting those from catastrophic wildfire, and also ensuring we have good sustainable water because these areas are highly infested by insect and disease and are very prone to wildfire as a whole. So under that Good Neighbor Authority, like I say, it is a very collaborative discussion with the Pikes Peak Ranger District, as I mentioned, Colorado State Forest Service, and then also the funding mechanisms that I already identified. So to date, we have completed 835 acres. Our goal of 1,000 is going to be exceeded by early 2025, being that we have contractors currently working on the landscape. So I fully intend us to be hitting 1,300 acres by the first quarter of next year, which is right on track. Our agreement is set to expire in November of 2025. So we're moving things very, very quickly, and recognizing that as it does expire in 2025, we're already looking to our next Good Neighbor Authority, which is going to be on the southern slopes of Pikes Peak. And then we're also looking for a collaborative project. We just hired another Colorado State Forest Service forester up in the Salida office to try to implement that work up around Twin, Turquoise, and Homestake reservoirs, which is near Blue River, Colorado. So more work to come. But as I promised you all, we were going to talk about success. How do we measure success? Well, for years on a national level, everybody wants to see acres treated. That's always been the targeted goal for federal funding, for national funding resources. And as I've sat on a lot of national committees over time, they always wanted to know how many acres are treated. And I tend to disagree with that metrics, because it's not about how many acres are treated, rather where those acres are treated and how those cross-boundary opportunities are present. So as we look at the map here, you look at the purple or pink, if you will, those are all acres that have been treated. Now we look at where we implemented the Good Neighbor Authority project work and where those are being instilled. Those are going to be collaborative natures where we are able to maximize our funding mechanisms. We're able to bring our partners in and treat cross boundaries. And so it's not just random acts of restoration. It's not random acts of treatment out across the landscape, but it's really in the right landscape for the right reasons and for the right protections. And so when we look at this in collaboration with our communities, we have Green Mountain Falls, Cascade right below us. These opportunities also have multiple benefits in completing project acres that protect our communities and our neighbors as well. And so this is just a really neat opportunity for us to maximize and leverage some of the funding mechanisms that are out there, but also for those opportunities to have a cross-boundary landscape and really showing where and why we treat it, acres and where we do. So risk variables are reduced and lives are saved. I think that's very important. We have about 4 terminal storage facilities. 3 of them you're looking at right there on your map. And so if those waters were to be contaminated or were lost to wildfire, post-fire debris flows, our city would quite literally come to a stop. We don't have a lot of fun piping mechanisms where we can bypass these reservoirs. So protection of these municipal water resources is critical. Are we making the difference? We are. We're seeing fire risk reduced. So we utilize land fire mechanisms to look at and see, are we truly making a difference? So land fire being a national data set that can actually show flame length and fire intensity. So we're seeing those reductions. And I'd be happy to talk through some of that off on the sidebar if somebody's interested. We're seeing ecosystems change across the landscape. We're seeing post-fire impacts being reduced. And we are ultimately protecting the community and water through the healthy forests. So if we don't have good, sustainable, and healthy forests, we're not going to have good, sustainable water. And a lot of people think that water just starts in a pipeline or just starts in a reservoir naturally, but that's not the case. It really starts on our forested landscapes, and it has to be healthy before it enters into these pipelines or into these water resources of creeks and rivers. So it's really important that we manage our forests with that mindset. So as we talk about sustainability, it's not always about going out and killing trees. And so we recognize quickly that it's also making sure that we have the right measures in place. We're protecting those water resources at its source. So we do leverage other funding sources to look at implementing projects that are healthy to water resources. We look at bridges for recreation up on like the White River National Forest or on the Pike National Forest. Off-road vehicles, trying to keep off-road vehicles out of water areas where we are collecting water or where water is going to run downstream and causing the debris and the sediment and turbidity to turn up into that water. So putting in bridges and keeping those vehicles on the road is really key. But we also leverage those funding resources and those grant funding sources to ensure that we have things like culverts, making sure that culverts are functioning properly and they're not susceptible to post-fire debris flows. So you can see the one there in the middle, undersized, almost filled in. We've changed that out to be an open bottom, which is benefits aquatic and fisheries. allows for the creek to naturally flow the way it should, and allows for post-fire debris flow to flow naturally through those areas without becoming a hindrance or taking out the road in the process. We also look at funding with our U.S. Forest Service partners. So the top right is some of our resources for the backcountry ranger patrols, where they put out and suppress wildfires from campers, and they're able to keep people out of the water resources as they recreate or utilize some of our backcountry landscapes in wilderness areas, in making sure that they are doing what they should be doing. Those folks put out about 60 unattended campfires a year, and just through those 2 seasonal employees. And so they do great work. We're very blessed to have them, and we're very blessed for those opportunities to fund them in the summer times to keep people on the straight and narrow. But ultimately, as we look at all these different landscapes, there are some resources that we're shortfalling in. We are realizing that although we're doing great things, there are still some resources that we need to improve. Sawmills and woody biomass facilities, which I don't think that's anything new to anybody here, are in desperate need. Unfortunately, on Pikes Peak, we don't grow very, very quality trees. I'd be willing to give anybody any trees if they're ever looking for some, because that's one of the challenges we have, is trying to reduce the woody biomass on the landscape. But ultimately, I have nowhere for that product to go. It's an extremely hard and difficult challenge, especially this time of year. So it's something that we're desperate need for, and I hope that some of our federal partners would agree with me. But it is a dire need for both sawmills or woody biomass facilities that are in close. We're also realizing that we need more holistic funding opportunities for watersheds. So I think the Wildfire Ready Watersheds is a great example, where we're looking both on the forested landscapes all the way down to the riparian areas down in the bottom, but having that holistic approach where we're looking from basically from the walls down and out to where that water ultimately ends up, and having that holistic approach to understand the concepts of treating a watershed as opposed just to a specific landscape is very key. State and federal legislation for continued restoration and risk reduction. I think this is very key, especially with our Fix Our Forests Act. I think there's some opportunities for some language change and some language of understanding that there's some provisions in there that may hinder or inhibit us from treating some of these landscapes. Although there's some beneficial language in there, I think there's some that needs to be changed as well. So I think some of those understandings of what language is in some of these documents and what that could do to the land manager or to those that are implementing projects on the landscape is key. And so as they look at those different measures of what they think is a benefit, really understanding the holistic approach and understanding what they're asking of these land managers to do is sometimes different. So I hope that with more state and federal legislation, they really go down and consult with those grassroots implementers and those people that are managing these landscapes to really understand what is needed and what that language should say overall. So I share all this with you, and I know I don't have all day to present all this information, but I'd be definitely open to having some sidebar discussions, some further discussions if it's warranted. Please feel free to contact me directly. And if you are ever in the Pikes Peak region, you are always welcome to attend a tour. We love hosting folks and coming to look at our landscapes along with our State Forest Service partners and U.S. Forest Service partners. We love showcasing our projects, and it's never a rough time up on Pikes Peak looking at some of our landscapes. So you're always welcome. With that, Samantha, I see your hand is up, ma'am.
Sorry, I was just clapping. I
Just
appreciate
clapping.
the offer.
Yeah, Jeremy, this has been a fantastic presentation. Just really well done. Thank you so much. This is exactly what we were hoping to hear and see, or at least I was. I'm assuming I see a lot of nodding heads and a lot of clapping. Going back to the Fix Our Forests Act, you said specific language. Can you state specifically some things that pop out and are a concern to you? Because I just had a one-on-one meeting with Congressman Neguse a day and a half ago, and he's very interested in this, of course, and he was asking for our water master plan, and this is kind of on his radar. So I'm just curious about some of that language or some things you think need to be maybe addressed.
Yeah, great question. So there is some language in the Fix Our Forests Act that it takes like a categorical exclusion where it upscales it from a 3,000 acre limit for a district ranger to approve to a 10,000 acre. Full support of that language. But underneath that language, there's also some embedded elements where it talks about forest fire regimes and forest health condition classes. I fully support condition classes. There's 3 condition classes that basically looks at a forested landscape. It's either functioning well, condition class 1. Functioning 2 means it's kind of sort of functioning, and then condition class 3 means that forest is not functioning, it's not healthy, it's not sustainable. That allows a land manager to implement project work where it's needed. And so I fully support that section. But there is one last section that talks about a fire regime. And I disagree with the fire regime piece, and we brought it up a number of times because the fire regime, frankly, is a moving target. When you look at the national areas or even the state of Colorado, you look at where the fire regime is, it excludes fire regimes 4 and 5. Fire regimes 4 and 5, if you look across the landscape, most of Pikes Peak falls into fire regime 4 and 5. All of basically Salida, Buena Vista, Poncha Springs, that entire valley is in a fire regime 4 and 5. So those would not be allowed to have categorical exclusions to be implemented on those landscapes because of the language that's in our Fix Our Forest Act. So some of those little things are just one more polygon or one more layer that land managers have to exclude or dance around because of that fire regime in recognizing that on the landscape. So it's very important when those little things make their way into language like that. It makes it extremely difficult for land managers to implement work. And that's some of our biggest wildfire risk areas as you think of, the valley there in Salida, Buena Vista, top of Pikes Peak on America's Mountain, to exclude those areas from those fire regimes. And frankly, I think some of those fire regimes are miscategorized, and I think they're out of date. Fire regimes, some of these landscapes say they're on a 200-year cycle for catastrophic wildfire and for a stand replacing fire. Well, most of our trees here on Pikes Peak are about 180 to 200 years old. So we're due for it, but yet we can't go out and manage these landscapes in a categorical exclusion because we're in a fire regime that who knows how old it is. So it's very important that we understand that, but that's specifically to answer your question, Commissioner, that's exactly what I'm pursuing and try to provide insight to. Well, I think you froze, Commissioner.
Thank you for that. Any other? I have lots of questions that Jeremy, I might take you up on your phone on your sidebars, but I see. Sorry, Pat, I muted myself. I see Pat has her hand raised.
Thank you. And I'll ask a quick question. It looks like Colorado Springs has done a great job of coordinating a whole bunch of different resources and a whole bunch of different partners. So you've got that piece kind of figured out. But if you had 1 or 2 tools you had to choose from that are missing or that you'd like to see that could help you scale up, what would they be?
The thing that I would love to see more of is more opportunities for woody biomass facilities. There's been a lot of opportunity where, I've been doing this for 20 years. For 20 years, we've always said that capacity and funding is our biggest limiting factor. And I kind of laugh at capacity because being a one-person shop, it just requires some people to roll up their sleeves and go to work. And then with funding, right now we're inundated with funding. In some cases, it's causing some analysis paralysis with some of our federal partners and some of our other funding mechanisms. So the funding's always been out there. It's just, you got to go after it and get it. But people don't realize it. The hard part's not cutting the tree. It's what do you do with it after? And unfortunately, that's our biggest Achilles heel, especially on a landscape where forested lands are not worth anything. Our limber pine species and some of our Engelmann spruce are just not worth anything for a sawmill or a merchantable product. And our federal partners feel that squeeze as well because they have to follow to the same quotas and the same standards as Pacific Northwest or some of these other areas. And they just don't have the timber volume. They don't have the product to offset some of their costs. And so they definitely have the pinch. And so if we could look at further funding woody biomass facilities or working with people like Tim Reeder, who does a phenomenal job at the state level trying to find avenues and resources. And then we had some funding, federal funding to help offset hauling costs. Most of my product is going all the way to Montrose or Blanca, Colorado. Some of it was even going all the way up to South Dakota. So from a funding mechanism, that quickly eats up your budget and quickly eats up your opportunities to go out and treat those priority landscapes when you're super limited on those resources. So I know it's kind of a long-winded answer, but that would be my goal for Colorado as a whole.
That's a great answer. We appreciate that very much. So thank you. Christina.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. That was great. Thank you for recognizing the Woodland Park office. And I just want to say personally, it's really exciting to be able to care about this landscape and working with you all on this, in my new role. So just want to say thank you to you and Springs for all the support for this agency. I'm curious about the fiber, since that's a new, I didn't realize you guys were expanding into fiber. So I'm just curious, does that, do you have to plan differently for that? Or is there anything that, that you have to change in terms of plans or pivot in terms of priority areas or anything? I know nothing about that side of utilities. So I'm just, wondering what's on your mind in terms of planning for that?
Yeah, great question. With respect to fiber, luckily it's mostly within the city itself to get people more onto a broadband system, utilizing fiber as a communication resource. And so as we transition to that across our watersheds, really not going to impact us in any way. It's mainly just one more, if you will, watch out across the forested landscape, because it is something that does hang on the overhead electric lines that runs through there. And on our water system is going to be automated to operate off that fiber. So right now, a lot of our water systems still require somebody to go out and turn a valve manually. It's now going to potentially go to an automated system, and then we can control it here in the city itself. And so really doesn't make any impacts to us. More time will tell, I guess, over as we look across it, but luckily most of the fiber is not going to be up on the mountainous terrains. It's going to be here in town and going to our large industrial sides of the business and industrial sides of the community. So yet to kind of see what its impacts are, but it's just now it adds one more variable to risk. Fiber is not exactly easy to repair, but it's definitely one more thing to consider, especially as we look in our urban fires and when we have our large open space lands, because we have a large amount of cities and not cities, but city parks and open spaces that have fiber that will be running through them. And so as we look at that, it could be impacted by those characteristics. So just one more thing to watch out for, and to prioritize more fuels management so it doesn't get so hot and melt our fiber system.
Interesting. Yeah. Thank you.
You bet.
I was thinking the exact same thing about the fiber, and we've been pulling fiber on poles, the rural electrics, and having to fireproof those poles and things. It's certainly another asset to think about managing. So does anyone else have other questions? I have one other one, and I think I will be contacting you, Jeremy, offline. I really am interested in just some tremendous partnerships and work that you've done. Actually, I have two questions. First, you talked about these off-seasonal rangers going up to look like some pretty remote areas to put out wildfires and things. And you talked that was grant funded and they're seasonal. So can you expand on that and tell me how that's funded? And because I think that's another thing is we have so many people up, in our remote landscapes more than before, thanks to the pandemic, but also just Instagram. Everyone wants to go take their Instagram photos. So I'm not trying to say anything, but it's true, right? And as we had 2 human caused fires here in Larimer County recently, I'm curious about that program because I do think that's important to have folks up, and they're also a great opportunity to educate folks. So I'm curious about that.
Yeah, great question, Commissioner. And with respect to the seasonal program, so we do utilize, actually we fund a number of seasonal staff, both on the Pike San Isabel and on the White River National Forest. A lot of that comes through our MOU and our annual collection agreement that we provide to the U.S. Forest Service. let's talk the Pike St. Isabel side. So on the Pike St. Isabel side, we fund timber marking crews for seasonal basis, but we also fund some of the fire crews. And the reason for that is pile burns in the wintertime. They're able to go out after fuels treatment and go burn those piles that are out on our landscape. I think we have somewhere around 10,000 piles right here on Pikes Peak that are behind for fuels treatment. So those folks go out and implement that project work in the fall and winter time as weather allows. And then on the White River National Forest, there's not a lot of fuels treatment up there. And the reason for that is because it's primarily wilderness. It's also a large amount of roadless, Colorado roadless. And then there are some backcountry areas. So the White River National Forest is one of the highest recreated forests in the country, if not the highest. And so what we have, especially following the pandemic, everybody wants to go out in the woods and go experience some of these beautiful landscapes, but they don't always behave. And so we leveraged our collection agreement early 2020 to realize that we have people that are misusing the forest. We have people that are creating contamination in our water in the wilderness areas. And then we have unintended campfires. And so the White River actually approached us and said, would you be willing to fund some staff to go out in the backcountry and kind of help mitigate some of these risks, which we were 100% on board, not knowing exactly what we're buying. But when they quickly came out with a report saying we put out 60 unintended campfires in a 3-month time span, you can imagine on a wilderness area how devastating that fire could be, being the limited fire suppression resources that are allowed in wilderness. You can't use chainsaws, you can't use aircraft resources. That would be devastating to our headwaters of our system and also the headwaters of those creeks and reservoirs. So for a couple of seasonal staff that could go out there, mitigate some of that risk and suppress some of those fires or help keep that water sustainable and clean for everybody, it was well worth the cause. And it came out of that MOU and just folks saying, hey, I recognize a problem. Would you be willing to help? And I say this is very important because we just had a meeting with our federal partners, and something that they're saying is if individuals are not part of fire, the U.S. Forest Service is not going to hire seasonal staff. And so that's devastating to us, being a funder in Denver Water and Fort Collins Utilities is another one, Aurora, and all of these utility providers that rely on programs like this, backcountry patrols, is going to be lost. And so this is a very, very impactful concern for us, because now we're not able to hire these individuals. Even though it's our funding, our utility dollars funding these individuals, we're not going to be able to hire them because of the federal regulations on hiring seasonal staff. So very impactful for us, very concerning for us. We had a meeting, I believe it was just last Friday, so a week ago today. We're having to kind of roll up our sleeves and figure out some way that we can make this possible. But ultimately, I don't have an answer. The Forest Service doesn't seem to have an answer quite yet. So just something to monitor and something to watch with the federal inabilities to hire seasonal staff. So I'm really curious how this is going to move forward, but it's been a great program for us, Commissioner. And for me, one campfire is well worth seasonal staff that is going out there to help make sure these landscapes are protected.
Fantastic. Thank you for that insight. And I didn't know about that new language. It has to be connected with fire. I do think I agree with you on backcountry support. I see it also when I hike up in Rocky National Park. I keep thinking, boy, I wish there was a ranger around here right now. So yeah. Well, I appreciate your presentation today, and thanks for answering all these questions. And just one last thing, because this is kind of segueing into our next item on the agenda. Great presentation, but we want to make sure that we're listening and hearing what you're sharing with us, that are some of maybe two of your biggest things you hope that we take away from this today, from you and your presentation.
I think the two big takeaways would be to continue allowing and supporting funding mechanisms like the Healthy Forests and Vibrant Communities, the furworm grant application, and the CoSwap grant funding. It's so key, because you can only do that work with those funding mechanisms. Back in the days where $800 an acre seemed like a lot, and today you can't get any work done for $800 an acre. So those funding mechanisms are instrumental in matching the dollars that we bear and we provide. Without those funding mechanisms, we're not going to treat landscapes, period. The other takeaway too is to leverage your partners, leverage your resources, buy a cup of coffee and sit down with your partners. I always say, there's opportunities for partners out there, but most people aren't willing to commit. But a partnership should be two ways. Should be both a give and a take, and it should be done through a cup of coffee, no matter the landscape or where you're at. And so I think it's important to leverage your partners, sit down with them, identify benefits and projects that have mutual benefit, because that's how you build mutual respect and how you ultimately build a true partnership and a true collaborative is through supporting each other, identify those opportunities, and go to work together. But without that, it's not sustainable, nor is it going to happen. So I truly value those aspects. So continue funding and seek partnerships and make sure it's a true partnership.
Fantastic. And that's another segue into the last item on our agenda today. So thank you so much for emphasizing that, and really fantastic presentation. Thank you for your work. Tremendous amount of work and really impressive. Thank you so much. Any other questions or comments? All right. Jeremy, thanks for coming back this week. I'm so glad we were able to give you we need to give you this whole time. So just really thank you very much. You got all this applause, all these little, thank you.
Thank you.
So
appreciate it.
We appreciate it. And please feel free to, contact us. And if you have more things you want to add or anything, but fantastic work. And thank you for your great stewardship. Okay. Well, that wraps up kind of our watershed and water thought considerations, and just, wow, amazing, these presentations we've had. So the reason, the next item, when we have about 15 minutes left, and Jeremy, you're welcome to stay and listen to our talk. So thank you for that. And thank you for putting your contact information in the chat again. We appreciate it. So I wanted to go back. We've had some great presentations from some partners from across the state. I mean, not every corner, but close, right? And so I wanted to kind of go back, and we don't have to get it all done today. But I thought, and I don't want to put this all on staff, but we've had some important presentations, and I had a conversation with Courtney and Allison after our last meeting, because Julie, I'll call out Julie specifically, she made a comment that made us all kind of stop and think about shared stewardship and collaboration and partnerships, because I think, we're struggling sometimes to think, what can we come up with some big legislative thing to put out towards 2026. And we know the workforce thing is important, but I think we've had some important presentations this year that have shared some important barriers or important things to keep going forward. And so we're going to talk about shared stewardship and key that up, but I wanted to kind of start a list. And Roberta, I hope you can do that while we're talking. Maybe you can put it up on the screen real quick. And Roberta, thanks for helping support us today. We appreciate that so much. And I don't know, maybe you could take a moment. I don't think we've introduced you today, and I apologize for that. That's my bad. So would you mind just taking a moment, introducing yourself? And I apologize for that. We kind of try to get rolling, and I wanted to make sure we respected Jeremy's time since we had to bump him from last time. So would you mind just taking a moment, introducing yourself?
Sure, yeah. I'm Roberta Anderson, and I'm new to the COSWAP team as the Forest Health and Wildfire Mitigation Program Assistant, and I'm just stepping in for Courtney today while she is on vacation.
Okay, so even if so like today, I don't know if we could start. Well, welcome, Roberta. Today, I asked him kind of his key takeaways, and some of those key takeaways was kind of this. I want to put on the list that patrol to kind of put out unattended, in these remote areas. I think that's huge. 60 fires in 3 months is just kind of stunning. So I'm thinking it might be something to note and bring up to support this or those kind of things to get folks back in the back area to kind of help, especially around critical infrastructure and watersheds. So I thought that would be a good thing to put on the list as a key takeaway. His key takeaway about shared partnerships and shared stewardship and developing those relationships. It's really important, I think. You can't build friends, you can't make friends when you need them, and to build that trust in that relationship, because this is, again, this shared stewardship, this shared responsibility across the whole landscape. And that includes our utility partners, our land stewards, managers, our folks like the Wild Turkey, National Wild Turkey Federation, the Neighborhood Conservancy, elected officials, counties, everyone. So I think that was another key takeaway for me from these presentations. And then today has just to continue funding. I think the wildfire ready watersheds, COSWAP, furworm, and then just continued looking for how the funding that we have, I think we're going to have to really advocate to keep going. So, and the woody biomass facilities and what do we do? So those are some key takeaways I have from today, but also I heard that from the last two, from what we know from our biomass study and things. So anyone else have anything from today or for last week they'd like to put on this list? Because also I'd like to send this list back to our presenters and say, hey, here's some of our key takeaways we heard from you. Thank you for presenting. We appreciate your time. Here's what we think we heard. What are we missing? Do you agree with what we found out? And then kind of go back and send that to them and get more feedback and just kind of reinforce that we heard them and that we appreciate their feedback, so they feel like it wasn't just we came, presented, listened, moved on, that we actually compiled this into something we're working on. So, Pat.
I have something that might be a takeaway, and I'd like to ask for a little bit of clarification. I think the one thing that he did say that I've heard several speakers mention is that the ups and downs with this federal funding is a major problem, right? And that would indicate to me that either we need a bridge or something that stabilizes that. I mean, it emphasizes the importance of COSWAP and furworm and other programs, but something to think about there. Did I hear him correctly that they have the money, but they won't be able to hire temporaries because of the Forest Service policy on temporaries? I mean, that seems like low-hanging fruit that we could maybe do something to help people out.
That was the one thing I wanted. That's why I was talked about that thing. But yeah, I agree with you, because yes, you did hear him right. And that's to hire those temporaries to go up and put out those campfires. That's something interesting. Julie.
Pat heard something that was similar to what I heard, and it ruffled me at the end, which is, again, I'm hearing this theme of there are either policies or federal regulations that either wording is in there that in real world implementation has unintended consequences that needs to be looked at, right? I mean, I don't know if it's antiquated and the policies just haven't been refreshed to the landscape of today, but it strikes me again that there are real challenges and limitations in language in either federal regs or policies that create an increased risk and a real limitation on resources for Colorado. And sort of highlighting that in our report out to the governor's office and identifying areas where here are some really key pieces on the federal side where we as a state should be partnering with other states that are feeling the same impact of these limitations to come together and say, we need to fix this to reduce our risk and to help increase our, the health of our forests, our landscapes, and all the parts and pieces. I get a little wound up when I hear that kind of thing, because that's what's limiting real action on the ground. If we can't hire people because there's some policy that's, somebody has got to help me understand why that policy makes any kind of sense, if those people put out 60 fires, the devastation that could have happened in a 90-day time period is unimaginable. And I think people need to hear that kind of real world impact.
2 people.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Look,
That's
look
why
at
I
what
thought,
2 people can do.
right. And look, that's just a little bit of funding that had massive impact.
Sure.
So that's why I wanted to have this idea of getting from back our presentations and getting all these things we heard as barriers or opportunities, because we're looking, try to put that idea of legislative priorities. But I thought maybe we should go back and I'm asking you all, and I know it's a lot of time, but I know staff probably doesn't have time to do this, to go back through some of those presentations and then put it on a list of things you heard, like we heard today. That's why Roberta's capturing what we're talking about today. And let's get on a list so that we can also maybe give out a report of these might be things that we can fix legislatively in Colorado, but I think we have to call them out, right? We have to highlight them. And I think, like you said, those are really low-hanging fruit that is something that just some language change. But Julie.
And I apologize. I should know the answer to this question, but I don't. The minutes that we are approving, when I think about how can I accomplish what you've just asked, one of the quick things I can do is go back through the minutes and go, "Ooh, that's right." Do we post our minutes, or do we compile them on a site somewhere that we could quickly go see the compilation of them? I've never done that.
No,
looking at them
I
pre-meeting.
think they're in our minutes and they go on our website. Like you
They're on
go
the
to
website,
conference,
okay.
they're on the website. But we also have our videos, so you can kind of fast forward and go in back just into the presentation and kind of listen, because we've had 5 weeks of presentations. So, and then just maybe email those all to McCourtney, Roberta, and myself, and just we're going to try to put that on a list to have our next presentation. So. I just think we've heard some pretty powerful things the last, we've in presentations, and I thank Courtney and Allison, all of them, for bringing some pretty amazing speakers. And because we talked about what we wanted to hear from, and I think this is really going to be, we can really do some thoughtful things. And also I heard the workforce, which is what we have this bill going forward, which we can talk about when we, with our next meetings, because we do have, that moving forward. So speaking of which, and I don't know if I can share or not, but we were talking about next meeting. We haven't voted on this, but I'm kind of, as a chair, kind of pulling this together with Courtney and Allison, a bunch of micro talks on shared stewardship and shared responsibility. And when I told Pat I was going to talk about this today, the Rocky Mountain Restorative Institute, I forgot, and it was a good reminder that we are the only area in the country doing that work. And that is historical, really important work in partnership. And it talks about, how we're going to do this collaborative effort for increased focus, scale, and pace to increase the resilience of our forest, wildlife habitats, communities, water resources across all the lands of the Rocky Mountains. And I think we want to kind of revisit that real quick and just have a high, because it's talking about communities and clean water and forest and wildlife and recreation all in one spot. And I think it would be great for us to kind of do a really quick overview of that. And then we're going to have these little micro, 5-minute talks on shared stewardship. And Allison and I and Courtney are going to bring in some folks to come and do those to kind of, I think, to go back to, just said this Colorado Springs example is a perfect example of shared stewardship, and look what they've done. And so how can we kind of also highlight or elevate that message again? Because I heard this through a lot of things, right? And so hoping we can do that next meeting, and then talk about this list of what we heard and barriers, and send it back to all the presenters and say, hey, this is what we heard. What are we missing, or what? And I want to make sure it's not an exhaustive list, because I'm sure we can't capture all of it, and we all have busy schedules. But I'm hoping we can do that for the next meeting, and kind of bring this all together, because I think we really could highlight some things. that are low hanging fruit, but also some big, important messaging or kind of that, what's the word I'm looking for, theme, or really this movement of shared stewardship, because we have to do this together. So anyway, that's what I was hoping to do next time, and looking forward to that conversation. So thank you all for being here today. I hope you found these last couple of meetings really helpful. So Allison, did I have anything else you needed me to say with that?
No, I think you covered it really well. And thank you so much for covering me while I had to step out really briefly.
In the meantime, look up the Rocky Mountain Restoration Institute, kind of do a little homework. So we got some homework, and we'll look forward to that meeting in 2 weeks. And it was great to see all of you with the visioning of the 30-year plan. I really love the artwork and kind of our conversation there. Just amazing thoughts and work together, and thank you all for that work. So with that, we're over time by a minute, so I apologize for that. Hope you all have a great weekend. I don't think I'll see you before Halloween. I think we're right before, right? Or maybe right after. So happy Halloween, everyone. Enjoy the holiday. Enjoy the snow coming, and take care. And thank you all for all that you do. I just value you all. You have had some great insights and words, and you have really inspired me the last month with some out of the box thinking. Veronica.
Thank you. I was trying to raise my hand. I had a coughing session while you were talking about our homework. Can you repeat that?
So just kind of go and look at the Rocky Mountain Restoration Institute, and then go back and look at some of our meetings and some of our presentations, and kind of look for those barriers and opportunities or key takeaways from each of those presentations over the last 2 months that we've had.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
we
And
will
then
send,
go ahead, Elson.
we can
Yeah.
send a follow-up email with some links as well.
That would be great. Thank you all. I'll take a motion to adjourn.
I'd so move.
A second?
A second.
All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Is anyone opposed? All right, we're adjourned. Thank you all. Happy Friday. Take care. Hey, Allison. That was a pretty great meeting. Can you hear
Allison
me?
might still be busy. I'm trying to end the recording. Let me see if I can do that.
Well, Allison, we can talk later.